Hello and thanks again for joining us for another Fathom Live, a live stream show dedicated to giving you tips and insights from experts in and around the real estate industry. I'm your grateful host, Jeff Sturt. So glad to be with you here today. September is Real Estate Safety Month, and so we're going to be talking about safety, self-protection, self-defense, those kind of things, as what it means to be to practice safety as an agent in this industry. And so we have two great guests lined up for you today and for the next show. Brannon Hicks for today, and then on the 16th we have Andrea Tabay. And so this is going to be kind of a part one, part two thing with the topic of safety. But wouldn't it be nice to have somebody that's an expert come to be able to talk to you about staying safe? I mean, as a realtor, you have a lot of different hats that you wear and a lot of different unpredictable situations you might find yourself in. And so it'd be great to have somebody that knows what they're talking about when it comes to self-defense. And that is certainly who we have here today with us, Brannon Hicks. And I'll bring him on in just a moment. If you get to commenting, give us a shout out. Where you're hailing from, where you're watching from as you're tuning in here, and that will automatically enter you into a contest to be able to win one of four prizes. You could get up to $200 worth of yard signs, a photo listing package, a on-target transaction, or Go Social leads service. Our last show's winner for that drawing was Vicky Testerman. So congratulations, Vicky, on winning one of those four prizes, and we'll be reaching out to you about that. The good people of Go Social Agent are our sponsors today. If you haven't checked them out, head over to GoSocialAgent.com. They offer effective and affordable social media marketing solutions to help agents grow their business. They get your account set up. They'll do automated postings for you, agent-branded articles, buyer and seller handbooks, Facebook ad campaigns, and this helps you grow your online community and generate leads. So head over to GoSocialAgent.com to get started today. And if you're a Fathom agent and you're watching this and you didn't know it, you get some of this stuff for free. So that's pretty cool. So check them out, GoSocialAgent.com. If you haven't hit the notification bell on YouTube, do so, because then that's going to help you, see it when it happens here, and then you can participate live with our guests. We're streaming both to Facebook, YouTube, and to Twitter. If you want to comment and participate in the show today, and even ask our guests some questions, please do so, and you can do that on Facebook and YouTube. I'll be monitoring both of those things here during the show. Without further ado, Brannon Hicks, hailing from the western panhandle of Florida.
Well, we're actually on the eastern coast.
Oh, you're on the East Coast. So, okay. All right. Sorry, I got my cities mixed up. So thanks for joining us.
Yeah, good to be here.
All right. Brannon, you have a background in law enforcement. How many years were you a law enforcement agent?
So I was in law enforcement for about 12 years before I retired to run my self-defense gym full-time.
Awesome. And during your tenure, I understand you did something wildly unpopular. At least if you were you said it would ruin your childhood.
It was pretty unpopular with me, as a matter of fact. I wasn't crazy about doing it. Yeah, we not something you go into law enforcement thinking, one day I'm going to catch the Easter Bunny. I'm going to get this guy. I'm going to put him in cuffs. But we got a call the day before Easter. We had a great little chocolatier here called Peter Brooks in Jacksonville. If you're ever here, stop in for sure. There are little franchises owned by people who often live right in those areas, right in those neighborhoods. And a very sweet lady who owned this one hired a guy to get into the Easter Bunny costume, hold up the for Easter sign, which seems relatively simple. Of course, in Jacksonville, Florida, it's about 100 degrees year-round, and I'm sure in this guy's defense, he was not terribly comfortable in the Easter Bunny suit. So he somehow thought the Easter Bunny helmet was a soundproof bubble that no one could hear outside of. So he was busily shouting obscenities at all of the traffic and pedestrians that walked by because he was unhappy to be in the suit. So we had to take him into custody and reclaim the suit for the owner of Peter Brook before we were able to release the Easter Bunny to go in the store.
It sounds like something out of a sitcom.
You don't expect it when the day starts. You definitely don't.
Maybe you mentioned this. Were you able to handcuff him? I mean, with the big mascot?
Surprisingly, Easter Bunny has very large wrists. And standard handcuff will not fit around
it. Great. Well, I'm glad you were able to protect and serve.
We were safe.
Well, let's get into things right away here, and I'm sure we'll have questions along the route here. maybe start off by telling our viewers, you mentioned to me there's a difference between self-protection and self-defense. What are those two things, and what's the difference?
For sure. The self-defense system that we base everything in is called Krav Maga. It's an Israeli system. It just means contact fighting. It's very malleable. It doesn't have to stick to tradition and remain unchanging in the way that some martial arts do. It's very flexible to change. Self-defense, though, is a pretty small set of tools that are intended to get you out of a really bad situation as quickly as possible and get away. So that's self-defense. Self-defense happens when everything else before it fails, when everything else before it breaks down. What should come before it are what we call self-protection principles. So those are how we remain conscious of our environment, educating ourselves about how and why we process information, how our body reacts, the physiological signs, symptoms that we're going to feel in what we call the fear chain response, and what people often call the fight or flight response, which is a bit misnamed. So we have all of these things that factor into having a better understanding of self-protection. That includes physical fitness as well.
Gotcha. What is why is that a misnomer when you say the fight or flight response?
There are actually four responses that we find. So we have fight, flight, which everybody's familiar with, and we have freeze, and we have faint. So those are your four possible fear responses. Fainting is pretty uncommon. Most people are pretty highly stimulated when they're going to a fear chain response.
Right.
That's pretty uncommon. In my law enforcement career, I undoubtedly found the most common response to sudden onset of violence was freezing. And that's not unusual given the fact that most of us live in a pretty safe society. We see on the news, America's a very, very dangerous place, and it's true that dangerous things happen. But compared to many parts of the world, we live in a pretty safe culture. So most of us aren't conditioned to walk around every day dealing with sudden violence.
Gotcha. And I've heard it in those situations too, that even if like you're in a group of people and everybody's frozen, if you can kind of snap people out of that by creating noise or whatever, it can kind of sort of generate you to kind of act.
For sure. The startle response is autonomous. There are only three things that cause a startle response in the whole world: falling, sudden approach, something showing up right in front of you, and then loud noises. People generally freeze or hesitate because they perceive they don't have enough time to respond, or they have no ingrained trained response and no experiential response to fall back on.
Gotcha. Well, thanks for distinguishing those. Something else that you mentioned as we were talking earlier was the decision cycle. What is that?
It's really important. When you lay this out, it seems kind of obvious, but it's a small piece of an air-to-air combat system called energy maneuverability theory. It was created by Lieutenant Colonel John Boyd during the Korean conflict. He was a brilliant military strategist. Boyd found that after 5 air-to-air engagements, when a pilot survived and won 5 of those, the odds of him losing after that were virtually zero. He was like Superman. He wasn't going to lose. What Boyd found was that every human goes through 4 stages in response to a threat or a stimuli. So we call it sometimes the decision cycle, Boyd's circle, or the OODA loop. So OODA means observe, orient, decide, and act. So in other words, in order to respond to a threat, you have to go through all 4 of those stages. You have to observe it. You have to orient to it. In other words, you have to figure out what it is, where it's coming from, what speed it's traveling at. You have to make a decision as to what to do about it. And then you have to act on that decision making.
So when you do, and I know we're going off notes here a little bit, but I'm just curious, when you do training at your gym with your clients, do you kind of set up scenarios to kind of go through those stages?
And I'll answer it this way. One of the major problems with self-defense, and I am not knocking martial arts. I've been a martial artist my entire life. I consider myself a martial artist. But one of the major problems with taking a martial art and presuming that it is self-defense is that the training method often doesn't match the reality. So Krav Maga, again, is a narrow set of concepts and principles for getting us out of a bad situation. But it's not just a set of techniques or concepts. It's also a training method. So that training method is a way that we induce what we call stress inoculation. We expose people to stress, confusion, exhaustion, fatigue, and we teach them how to respond under those circumstances. And we do things like, if we're working a choke defense, they're going to have their eyes closed. They're going to respond to the feeling of the choke. They're not going to be able to see it coming. And they don't know if that's a choke from the front, the back, the side. So they have to learn to move through that decision cycle very quickly, almost instantaneously, if we can get it there.
Very good. And just something I wanted to kind of ask off the bat here, as we're thinking about agent safety and protection, I suppose it might be tempting to think that this is only a topic for ladies, as you often see, like in the news, that a lady is, stalked or pursued that way by an attacker. But is this just a topic for the female agents or male as well?
Definitely for both. And we talk often about women's self-defense in this industry.
Right.
My opinion is women's self-defense doesn't exist. There is no such thing as women's self-defense. There is only self-defense. So years ago, and I even said this myself, we used to say we can't teach men the same way we teach women. We have to teach women differently. What we were actually doing at that time is we were teaching men to do some pretty stupid things, and we were teaching women to do some pretty smart things. And we learned over time, we don't have to start training the women like we train the men. We learned we have to start training the men like we train the women. We all have the same end goal. In Krav Maga, say we don't teach people how to fight. We teach people how to do a lot of damage in a short period of time to sensitive body parts and then get away.
Gotcha. And as it relates, though, to the topic of being an agent and not even getting into a situation where you would potentially have a threat, do you have different advice for guys versus girls, or ladies versus men in this industry?
Not really different, because it's one of the things that we kind of get to is ego. And a friend of mine who is a black belt in Krav Maga, Betty Kay, she's awesome, teaching down in Missouri. She made a post on Facebook, and it struck me as an interesting way to look at it. But she went through a list of things that she or other women do to kind of prepare themselves throughout the day to remain safe. And I'm looking at this list. This is what I do with my keys. This is where I'm conscious of all these things.
Right.
I and most guys don't even think about it. It doesn't even cross our minds. That ego that is often carried by guys gets us into some pretty bad situations.
Yeah.
So there really is no difference in the self-protection or self-defense principles that we teach, because at the end of the day, we are all human, we are all mortal, we're all vulnerable.
Right. Very good. So what should an agent do kind of from the outset to prevent them from getting into a vulnerable position in the first place?
When I first started teaching real estate seminars, I didn't know a lot about the industry, and I'm obviously fairly novice to the industry itself, but just talking to a few agents, there were a couple things that set off some alarms in my head. Somebody mentioned the practice of meeting a new client at a potential home site before they ever meet them in public or at their office or anywhere else. And that really set off some red flags for me. If at all possible, I would suggest if you're going to meet somebody and the plan is for you and that one other person or whomever they bring with them, because you won't know that till you get there, instead of doing that, meet in the office, meet somewhere public, make sure people know where you're going, make sure people who know who you're with, get that base covered right off the bat.
Very good. One of the terms that I've heard, I would be less than a novice when it comes to self-defense, but it is the idea of being a soft target or not being a soft target. How can somebody avoid being a soft target for a potential perpetrator?
In some different ways. And there's some interesting psychology around how criminals choose their victims. And a great article I just shared on our Facebook, if you follow it. It's got a lot of good info in there. But
would you mind mentioning actually kind of what the name of your
Sure.
company is and your Facebook page?
Absolutely. 1780 Fitness and Martial Arts, and you can find us on Facebook. The article is actually on there. It was, I believe, published in Psychology Today.
Okay, great.
On how criminals select victims. And most of that is nonverbal communication. When we're walking, if we're distracted, if we're looking at our cell phone, if we're looking through a bag, if criminals know that we're distracted, if we're walking in a way that suggests we're timid, we're kind of closed in, we're holding our things in, we're shuffling our feet quickly. Experts generally, and I as well, recommend taking long strides, let your arms swing, keep your head up, keep it on a swivel, keep looking about you. If you see somebody looking at you, don't maintain prolonged eye contact, but don't look down and don't look up. Meet their eyes and then just look away to the side. Let them know that you actually saw them. Those nonverbal indicators, merely appearing confident, appearing capable, are things that often dissuade attackers.
Very good. So just in the way you carry yourself and non-verbally interact with people.
And I'm sure we all know somebody, we look at them and go, I wouldn't mess with that person.
Right.
It's just
they mean business.
That's carry over, right?
Yeah.
You want to have that sense of confidence about you.
Right, and if the person hasn't been particularly stalked or targeted, the perpetrator is probably going to move on to somebody else immediately, or who is easier to attack. And I know you said that you've kind of gotten into the real estate industry from a safety, self-defense, self-protection standpoint. But do you know what would be the most common ways people are attacked in those sort of settings?
Ambush. So an ambush is one of the most common ways that since I started collecting articles on real estate agents being attacked in different times and places, an ambush seems to be just about the most common. I read an article, it could have been a couple of months ago, about a lady who sets up an appointment, goes to the house. She meets the client who she had met before, but there are two other men who have already come in the back of the house waiting, and then she was abducted. And that is one of the differences that you'll see when men are attacked versus women, real estate agents. More often, men are victims of robbery or just outright assault. Women are more commonly victims not only of robbery but of sexual assault and abduction. Of course, men are sexually assaulted as well, but it's at a much lower rate.
Gotcha. And so, especially as it relates to, like, let's say you go to a location or you're there with a client. Where do you see agents making the most common mistakes that make them vulnerable?
One, again, before the meeting, make sure that you meet in front of the house. I suggest getting there before the client, making sure your entrances and exits are unlocked. You know where they're at, you know that they're available. So your ability to egress, to exit from the building as quickly as possible is really important. The other thing I'd suggest, and this might be hard from the perspective of showing a home, I'm not sure, but if you can avoid having a client follow you through the door or follow you into a room, it's going to be best. If you can hold your hand out, let them walk in first, and follow them into the room, that's going to be your best bet. It'll leave the exit at your back, most accessible to you, and it will often mitigate their ability to launch an ambush.
Very good. Do you recommend somebody taking a friend along with them? I mean, to accompany them to, especially a first time showing with somebody.
And I think that's a great idea. It's safety in numbers. The two people are more difficult to deal with than one, and a lot of times criminals are simply opportunists. They see an opportunity, they sense some weakness, and they go for it. Obviously, that's going to be easier with one person than two. So if you have an opportunity to have a friend meet you there, that's certainly a good idea as well if you have that resource.
I watched something that you did on home invasions, and I think you had another term for. Well, like one was kind of premeditated, the other one was like a burglary or something kind of more spontaneous. Do you? How often is this kind of stuff from your experience premeditated versus, like you said, kind of just like, hey, here's an opportunity obviously from a criminal standpoint?
I don't have statistics on it. Anecdotally, I've found that real estate agents going to check on homes, just from the stories that I scan, it is uncommon, but when it happens, it's not uncommon for the scenario to be that somebody simply sees a realtor walking up to a house they know to be abandoned or for sale or loan, and then takes advantage of that. As the instance I just mentioned, of course, they knew that they would be asking this woman to come to the house, so they set up an ambush.
Gotcha.
Both of those are possibilities, but it doesn't change the self-protection principles that go along with them. You just got to be aware of what we're going and what we're doing there.
So, kind of progressing forward then. So, say an agent does get into a situation where they maybe there is an actual attack at this point, but they just know something's off here. Do you have any kind of advice on figuring out how to back out of that situation safely?
And so, if you are getting indicators, which will probably be through nonverbal communication, the vast majority of communication that we do as humans is nonverbal. But any study that you read is going to tell you the same thing. We all grow up, even without being formally trained. We all grow up perceiving and absorbing these small cues in nonverbal communication. If you get nervous, if you get scared, my suggestion is to extract yourself from that situation as innocently as you can. Hey, I'm sorry, I got to take a phone call real quick. I'm going to step outside. Go outside, get in your car, leave. Go outside, get in your car, call somebody. And what's the worst case scenario? Maybe you look a little silly. Maybe you were
Right.
being a little paranoid, but now you're safe.
Right. Very good. If things do then turn south, and that agent is being attacked or is going to be attacked, I mean, it's happening. What should they do next? Do they fight? Do they run? Do they try to get on their phone and call for help? What's sort of
Here's
your...
one of my things. I can never tell somebody they should or should not resist, and the reason I can't is because It would be unethical of me. It would be immoral of me. I don't suffer the consequences of their actions. What I can do is teach people how to resist, how to fight back, how to get themselves out of a bad situation. But if your plan is to resist and you find yourself in that kind of a situation, what we teach is very much violence of action. And we use the word violence as if it is entirely a bad thing. It is entirely, a thing that shouldn't happen. But violence is a tool. It's a part of the human condition, and people use it for good and people use it for ill. We teach you that you have to understand how to use violence better than someone who would try to use it against you. Really, it's the ultimate form of authority because nothing comes after it. If you're down to the point where you have to use violence to defend yourself, then that's all you have left.
Very good. Something that I've read, and I just to bounce it off you, is that in many situations, especially with guys, you're talking about that ego issue. Is we want to put our dukes up and all right, you want to have this out, let's have this out, kind of thing. When you have the opportunity to run, just to get out of there. Do you have any advice as far as fleeing versus fighting?
Look, if you ever see me on the news and they say head Krav Maga coach of 1780 Fitness and Martial Arts, co-lead instructor of the United States Krav Maga Association, runs away from man with knife, yeah, that's exactly what I would do.
Good.
Our order of operations is avoid a violent encounter. If you can't avoid it, run away from it. If you can't run away from it, then you have to defend yourself. I've had to deal with people with knives before. I've got some injuries from it. I don't want any more. Trust me, if I had an option to pick up a chair and hit them, I would not be doing any cool empty hand knife techniques.
Yeah.
So if at all you can avoid it, that's what you got to do. If not, run away from it. If you're capable, and that's a very real question of running away from it, and then if not, you have to defend yourself.
Gotcha.
And I tell people all the time too. We used to say this when we were kids, not knowing any better, but tell people you have to learn to fight like a girl. And a buddy of mine says Krav Maga. He's a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu guy, so am I. But he says that's where you kick people in the balls and run away, isn't it? Yeah, that's what that is.
Yeah.
So we pull hair, we poke eyes, we bite. We kick to the groin, and it's not a martial art in the way that most people think of martial arts, for sure.
Gotcha. Very good. Do you recommend, and I know this can differ from state to state, and maybe even from city to city within a state, do you recommend that agents carry any sort of weaponry or self-defense tools to help them in case of an attack?
Yeah, here's the thing, and it reminded me to talk to you about an app called Noonlight. Don't let me forget that, and I'll tell you about that app. But training is the key, right? With self-defense training, most of the time it's going to be sudden onset. You probably didn't know it was coming, or you wouldn't be in that situation in the first place. So accessing tools and weapons can be very difficult in many situations. But anytime you add a tool, whether it's pepper spray or a Kubotan or a firearm, you have to add a lot of training to go along with that tool. What very often happens is you have these companies that market self-defense tools, that market firearms. There is no training and no experience to go along with how to use that weapon or that tool. And that's what I think people are lacking. It's very common for people to ask me, should I buy a gun? And I say, I don't know, tell me about your training budget. What kind of training are you going to get? Yeah. They stare at you blankly 99.9% of the time. They haven't thought about what kind of training they're going to get. They don't have a training budget. I tell most folks, save up for a good self-defense training class, then budget your firearm, buy that, take it right to that class.
Very good. And my understanding, too, is most of the encounters that you have that do involve a gun or some sort of, whether it's gun or taser, it's going to be pretty close quarters, right? I mean, within just a few steps of somebody. So if I'm not at the ready and trained to be able to use it, that could be used against me.
For sure. And that's something we talk about a lot. And Krav Maga is almost entirely close quarters combat. If you think about a martial art like judo, which is my favorite thing to do, or Muay Thai, which is my favorite striking sport, we have a defined space. We know how big it is. We know there's not going to be anything in it. There's not going to be a coffee table or couches or anything else.
Right.
When we have to defend ourselves, we may be in a very full environment. So we have to learn to work in different environments. We have to learn to work around those things. And with firearms, the average distance that a self-defense situation requiring a firearm starts is about 3 to 5 feet.
Wow.
So it is within arm's reach. So if you have a firearm on you, think about, do you train to draw it under stress at the range? Do you train to get some rounds on a target that is within arm's reach? And do you train to do that while you're getting punched in the face? because that's what you're looking at when it comes to self-defense. And of course, we don't do it with live firearms, but in our system, we train exactly that way. If you have a weapon on you, see if you can get to it. If not, what do you have to do in order to get to it or defend yourself until you can?
Gotcha. So you're actually like, you have like a dummy weapon or whatever, and it's like, okay, we're going to get you in this situation, try to get that out, try to, see how you'd actually be able to use it against, somebody that's
Exactly.
attacking you.
Another of our black belts in USK, Matt Kissel, has a great course. I think he calls it fighting for your gun. So it's the drill starts off, you're empty hand, you're attacked, and then you have to see if you can in fact get to your gun or not. It is incredibly difficult.
Very good. You mentioned, I think you said Noonlight with an N, as in.
Noonlight, no,
Yeah.
neat little apps. It's,
Okay.
this app, this might be a good one for realtors to have as well. So basically, you open this app on your phone and you press the button, right? So you press it for a length of time, 30 seconds. If you don't release it within that amount of time, it calls 911, sends your location, and calls help to you. So another good way to get help if you're not able to just get on the phone and say that you need help. If you're conscious of what you're doing, you can open that app, get it ready before you go into a house, before you go into any situation where you realize there might be some risk. And it's another good way to get some help coming as fast as possible.
Awesome. Any other apps or anything that you'd recommend from a technology standpoint?
Really, that's the only one that I'm overly familiar with. I'm not a big fan of tools on the tool belt. I'm not a big fan of the bat belt as far as adding, grappling hook and and a knife and a pepper spray and a taser. These are all tools that can and will fail. And
Okay.
you look at the taser in law enforcement, and it's a big tool, but it has about a 50% failure rate
Yeah. Yeah.
for a number of different reasons.
Right. And then I guess any and by the way, again, guests, if you're or audience, if you're watching, feel free to ask Brandon any questions. But do you have any like books? I mean, I think you just recommended one about how to trying to get your gun in self defense. Do you have any other books that you'd recommend or reading materials
I do.
to aid our
Yeah,
agents?
there are a couple that are really key. One of the books that I recommend, because it's really important to understand the fear response, right, and how it works to your advantage, how you can make it work to your advantage, why it's there. Fear is, although unpleasant, it's one of our best survival tools. The Gift of Fear by Gavin DeBecker is one book that I recommend for anyone who's interested in learning how to defend themselves, understanding how to use and control their own fear response. Another great book is called Meditations on Violence by Sergeant Rory Miller. His career was a lot like mine: SWAT operations, law enforcement, martial arts. Another great book on understanding what it takes to use violence against another person to save yourself, because there is an emotional toll for that for many of us.
Very good. Well, I appreciate you giving us. I know this is like super crash course, and I know when you normally deal with people in a real class setting, you're doing a lot more than this, even just the academic side of things. So I appreciate you giving us a flyover. And our next guest, you know Andrea, correct?
Yeah, I trained Andrea before she got her black belt in Krav Maga. I'm very familiar with her. She's great, good resource for the show. People are going to learn a lot.
Awesome. And she's here in the Dallas Fort Worth area where we're at. Before we let you go, any other final kind of word of advice or tips that you could help our agents with?
Here's something I suggest everybody keep in mind: what we call the 3 Ps of perception, prediction, and prevention. Perception, scan. Anytime you go into or out of a building, scan your environment. Anytime you go to get into or out of your car, scan your environment. If you walk into a new room, scan it. It costs you fractions of a second to look about, and that is your primary way, of course, of getting input to see if any threat is going to be there. If you perceive something that you feel may be a potential threat, you're going to start to make predictions about it. You'll decide if it is or is not a threat. My suggestion there is to err on the side of caution. If you think there's even a chance that this thing might be a threat, then take the best preventative measure to A, avoid it, B, flee from it, or C, fight your way out of it.
Awesome. Thank you for that. Again, thank you for taking your time. And if you want to check out Brannon's company there, it's 1780fitness.com.
1780 Fitness and Martial Arts, but you can find us at 1780fitness.com.
Awesome. And if we do have agents in the Jacksonville area watching, hit them up and take a course there.
We train quite a few, so hopefully we see them again.
All right, very good. Well, for the rest of you remaining here, again, we're looking forward to the next show with Andrea Tabay. If you haven't checked us out, if you're not a Fathom agent, you haven't checked us out online, visit us over at fathomcareers.com. And you'll discover a brokerage that instead of you working for them, they work for you. We offer what we feel is a very competitive commission split, or commission plan, excuse me. You get 100% commission with just a small flat transaction fee, as well as the tools designed for your success. That includes a paperless back-end transaction management system, multi-tiered support, marketing resources. Every agent for free gets the KV Core CRM and an integrated website. So a lot of stuff there for you there as an agent, and we have hundreds of agents joining us even this year. So we encourage you to head over there. We'll see you on the next show. Continue on with self-defense.